Hi, my name is Matt Hernandez. I'm a photographer and Photoshop artist from Paducah, Kentucky, and this is part three of my three-part series on how I created this composite of Tennessee Titans strong safety George Wilson. So, just to recap, in the first tutorial, I walked you through how to make a selection of the subject, and I used the pen tool in conjunction with the quick selection tool to pick up some of the finer details here. There were a couple problems with flare back here, and we didn't shoot on seamless, so I walk you through how to get past those. In the second tutorial, we prepared the background in Lightroom 4. I bracketed this, but I didn't have to HDR it because I knew I was going to take the sky out and replace it with this sunset. So I'll walk you through how to do that. And then in this part 3, we're going to paint some shadows in and then blend the images together to create this final image. So let's get going here. Okay, at the end of part 2, I brought the selection in, or the cutout, into the new background, and we're ready to start making these look like they're one image. So right away I see we're going to have to paint some shadows in here. That's never an easy thing. I wanted to do that in this tutorial, even though it's a little more advanced, just to show you a relatively easy way to get around it. And it doesn't work exactly this way every time, but this is an example of how it can work because the light's behind him. So we're going to have to do that, and then we're going to have to use some blending modes, or I'm sorry, adjustment layers and blending modes to blend this together. So before I start with the shadow painting, I'm going to do one thing. I'm going to retouch him a little bit. And to do that, I'm going to go over here in the layers palette. I'm in my cutout group here. We've got our path layer and our quick selection layer. I'm going to create a blank layer. On top of that, you can press Shift Command N. I'm on a Mac, not a PC. I apologize for PC users. I don't know the shortcuts for PCs, but I'm going to get on the top layer and then press Shift Command N to create a new layer. I'm going to name this Retouch. This is just a quick retouch. This is nothing advanced. This is, probably doesn't have to be done because he's got pretty good skin, but I just wanted to go through it real quick. I debated whether or not to do it at all, but I think it's something that I do on all my images, so it's better just to show you. All right, so I'm going to press J to go to my healing brush over here on the left. Make sure you're set on Align Sampled. You're up here at the top. You're set to current and below. Okay, so I'm on my blank layer. I'm going to press the Option key to sample a section where when I see a part that needs to be retouched, I'm going to sample a section that's near it that looks about the same. All right, it's basically to clone it. I'm going to paint it. It's gonna blend those together. Okay, so Option click and then paint the area you want to retouch. So I'm just going to do this relatively quickly. I think a lot of you probably know how to do this already. I'm not going to go in depth. And these scars need to go. This isn't going to take too terribly long because, like I said, he's got pretty good skin. And honestly, I could probably get away with not doing it at all. But I usually try to do it a little bit in every image just to clean it up. This should not take very long. Some little spots here. Just Option clicking and then painting the area that needs to be retouched a little bit just to make it a little bit more clean. And there's some more advanced techniques you can do to retouch. But this isn't a retouching tutorial, so we'll maybe save that for another time. Arm looks good. And I'm pressing spacebar and clicking and dragging to move around the image here. And I am in full screen mode. You can press F. So this is regular mode. Press F to go to full screen mode. That way you can drag around the image like this freely without any restrictions. Okay. I think that's probably good enough. All right. Okay. Make sure this is nice and smooth. Okay, now zoom back out. Okay. So now we've got a group over here on the right with the two original selections that make one. We're gonna combine these just to make things a little bit easier so we don't have quite so many layers. Make one selection. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna click on one of these layers that has the original image of him. Now if you press Shift on the mask, it'll hide it. You can see there's the original image of George. I'm gonna bring it back. Okay. I'm gonna press Command J to duplicate that layer. And then I'm gonna Control click on the mask and delete it. Okay, now I'm going to hide that layer. Actually, let's turn it back on. Okay, I've got my retouch here at the top above that layer. See, there's before and there's after. I'm going to combine those real quick just so the retouch is on the original layer. Okay, now I'm going to turn it off. I'm going to hide it for a minute. Okay, I'm going to hold my command key and click, see that little white square? That means you're going to make a selection of this mask. I'm going to command click on it. All right, there's a quick selection layer. I'm going to hold shift and command click on the second layer mask too. Now we've got our whole selection ready to go. I'm going to save that just in case. It's good to work non-destructively, so if you need to go back and change something later, you can. That's why I'm making this one layer with the mask. If you need to go back and alter it later, you can. I know I'm not going to have to because I've walked through this image, but if you're going through something the first time, you never know. You might find a little spot of the mask that needs to be refined. So that's why we're going to create one layer with this selection, and you can go back and change it later if you need to. So I've got my selection here. I'm going to go up to Select, Save Selection, and I'm going to name this Cutout. You can name it whatever you want, just so you remember. Press OK. Now that selection's saved, so you don't have to worry about if you mess something up with the mask, you can go back and remask it later. So now I'm going to turn that duplicate layer back on that's not masked. All right, and I'm going to go down here in my layers palette and hit the mask button, and there now we've got one mask on one layer with the quick selection and the path layer. Now I'm going to delete these two original layers, but I'm going to click the top one, hold shift, click the second one, go down here to the trash can. Now they're thrown away. All right. Now we've got our cutout that's just one layer. All right. That makes things a little bit easier, a little more clean. Okay. Now we're ready to paint some shadows. Pressing Command minus to zoom out. Okay. So, you got to examine the image now. Look where the light's coming from so you know where the shadows are going to go. So the sun is right behind him, so I know that the shadow is going to be between me and the subject. He's not touching the ground, so it's going to make it a little bit easier. So and shadows mimic the whatever they're coming from, the subject. So what we're going to do is, I'm going to name this Cutout. Okay. All right, so we've got our layer here with our mask. We're going to duplicate that by pressing Command J. All right. And then we're going to name this Shadow. Okay. Now, move that to the bottom, click and drag. Okay. So now, what we're going to do is we're basically just going to flip this to create a shadow. But to do that, it needs to be black. So you've got your layer of him with your mask. All you have to do here is click on the layer and go to Edit, Fill. And then in the contents here, go to black. Now that layer is filled with black. Okay, so we need to flip it. So the way that I'm going to do that is go to Edit, make sure you're highlighted on your new black layer, the shadow layer. Go to Edit, Transform, Flip Vertical. There we go. Okay, now we need to move it, obviously, but we're headed in the right direction. So I'm going to press V to go to my Move tool. I've got my Show Transform controls selected up here, checked. That means you can mouse over these control points and move your image, transform it. So when you mouse over the corners like this, that you get the little curvy arrows, that means you're going to rotate it based on this center point here. So I'm going to click on that and rotate just like this. I'm going to zoom out a little bit. Okay. Move it down. Rotate a little bit more. So I want his toe to not quite be touching. I'm going to use my arrow keys now because I'm really close to where I want to be. Right there. Okay. Maybe let's rotate it just a tad more. Okay, that looks good. I'm using my arrow keys just to kind of fine tune where I'm putting this thing. Okay, up a little bit. All right, right there. That looks about where we want it, I think. Okay, I'm going to press Enter. You can also go to Edit, Transform, Free Transform. Edit, Transform, Free Trans. Edit, Free Transform right there, or Command T. They can also move or scale or turn the object. Okay, press Command minus to zoom out. Oh, we got a little bit of black right here out of the mask, so I'm going to highlight the mask, click on it, press M for my marquee tool over here on the left, select that, make sure you're on the mask, and then hit delete. Okay, press Command D to deselect. Okay, now, obviously this shadow's not going to be that hard. He's not touching the ground, so you know it's going to be a little bit softer. This foot is a little bit higher off the ground than this one. This one's relatively close. So this shadow is going to be softer than this one. So we're going to have to create 2 of these. So you're on your shadow layer, press Command J again to duplicate it. All right, I'm going to name this one left foot, and I'm going to name this one right foot. Now I'm going to highlight both of them by pressing Command, clicking, and then pressing Command G to create a group. Name that shadow. Okay, now we're going to open it up. Okay, I'm going to let's turn the right foot off and just work with the left foot. Okay, so this is going to be our left foot, so we don't need this shadow for his right leg, so we're going to get rid of that part of the mask. So we're going to press M for the marquee tool again. We'll go over here and select the marquee tool. I'm going to drag around that part of the mask. When you've got this little white arrow and a little white box in the middle, that means you can move that mask around. Up here at the top, you want the first option, the first box, new selection checked. All right, so we're going to move that just a little bit off the pasteboard here. Make sure you're on the mask and then hit delete. All right, so now we've just got that one foot. Now we've got to blur it a little bit, and this light is going to be really soft, and you've got to keep that in mind the time of day that you're at. If this is the middle of the day, then that shadow is going to be pretty hard. Maybe just blur it just a little bit, but this is sunset. The sun's almost down, so that's going to be pretty soft. So the reason we filled this with black is because we're going to double click on the mask, go to our properties panel over here, and we're going to feather this. And I've done this once already, so I know what I'm going to have to feather it. But the reason you're doing this is you're working non-destructively, you're feathering the mask. So if it's not blurred enough, you decide later when you're almost done, you can go back and blur it more. But I know, because I've done this, that I'm going to have to feather it about 70 pixels right there. All right. Hit enter. Okay. And then we're going to set the blend mode to multiply. All right. And then drop the opacity to about 30% and hit OK. Now you can barely see that, but what you have to keep in mind is, and you're going to see this as we go along, we're going to use adjustment layers and blending modes to blend this image, and it's going to create contrast and density, so that's going to darken up a lot. But that's the advantage to working non-destructively. If it's not dark enough or it's too dark, you can go back and change that later. So we're going to leave it at 30% for now. Okay, now I'm going to turn it off. Now I'm going to turn the right leg on, and we're going to do the same thing. We're going to click on the mask, press M for the marquee tool. I'm going to select around, click and drag, and then move that a little bit off the pasteboard. So we're going to delete his left foot. Okay, just hit the delete key, then press Command D, deselect. Now we're going to blur the right foot. It's not going to have to be blurred as much because it's closer to his foot, so it's going to be a little bit harder. So we're going to blur this one. We're only going to blur it. We're going to double click on the mask. We're going to feather it 10 pixels. Okay. And now you know it's not going to be this long because the sun is almost down. Shadows aren't going to be very long. Okay. They are when the sun's a little bit higher, but I think it's almost down, so we're going to go ahead and just fade that out because I know the light's getting really soft now. So the way we're going to do that is we're going to fade this mask. So I'm going to press G or go over here to my gradient tool, make sure we're white to black, the mode is multiply. I'm going to click on his toe and drag right there. Okay. And I'm going to press Command Z. I'm going to do it again. I don't think I got it enough. There we go. Okay. That looks pretty good. And we're going to set the blend mode to multiply again. And we are going to make it about 50% because it's going to be, opacity is going to be 50%. It's going to be a little bit darker than this other foot. Now it's turning the left foot back on. Okay, so that looks like a good starting point. Again, if we need to go back and change it, if we find out later that doesn't look right, then we can go back and alter it. But keep in mind, this foot is closer to the ground, so the shadow is going to be harder, and it's going to be a little more visible. This one, his foot's off the ground more, so it's a little more blurry and a little bit less opacity. So I think that's good on the shadow. If not, we'll go back and change it. So there, we've got our shadow in. Now we can start blending the image together. And we're going to do that by creating adjustment layers to create a global white balance here that looks the same, so they look like they're taking the same environment. So the first thing that I usually do is I go down here to my adjustment layers. It's the fourth option over in your layers palette. This little circle that's half white and half gray. Click on it, and I'm going to go to hue saturation. This is going to allow you to colorize and create a color cast for the image. Again, I've walked through this, so I know that this is going to be this is a little bit on the dark side, everything. So we want quite a few adjustment layers to blend this. So if we put as many as I want, it's probably going to end up being a little bit too dark in the shadows. So I'm going to lighten it up a little bit. And the way that I'm going to do that is I'm going to set the blend mode on this hue saturation layer to screen. That's going to brighten everything up. I'm going to double click on the circle here to edit the hue saturation layer. Now, to color, actually, you know what? Let's set the blend mode back to normal real quick. We'll get the color first, and then we'll set the blending mode. So double click on this little circle. Once you've created it, hit colorize. Now that's going to make the whole thing a global color. And we're going to, this is sunset, so it's quote unquote the golden hour. So we want it to have kind of a goldish, yellow, orangish tone. So we're going to change the color of this hue saturation layer. We're going to make it about 45. Okay. So that's kind of a yellowish color. And then we're going to set the opacity to about 50% and go to screen for the blend mode. That's going to lighten everything up a little bit. Okay, because we're, like I said, we're going to build a lot of contrast. Okay, so that's giving it a little bit of a golden tint, lighten it up a little bit. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate that layer by pressing Command J. Now I'm going to leave the opacity at 50, but I'm going to change the blending mode to soft light, because now that we've lightened it, we can start building some contrast. Now that's going to start building some contrast. So I'm going to turn these two layers off that we just created. There's before, and there's after. So there's the lighten layer, there's the darken layer. See, if I turn the first layer off here, the one that's set to screen, it's a little bit too dark. That's why we lightened it up. You can do that with levels or curves also, but that's a quick, easy way to do it. Okay, now I am going to kind of, I feel like most of the time in my pictures, I try to desaturate a little bit. I feel like out of camera, things are just a little bit too saturated. So we're going to add a black and white adjustment layer here too. Go back down to your adjustment layers, go to black and white, about almost halfway up. Okay, and we are going to set that to soft light also. And the cool thing about black and white is you can adjust all the individual tones inside, all the colors inside individually. And I'm going to lighten up his skin a little bit, which his skin's going to have orange and red in it. So I don't want that to be too dark. So we're going to move the reds to the right, which is going to lighten them to about 130. We're going to move the yellows also to about 115 right there. Okay. Maybe about 110. Let's go down a little bit. That may be a little bit too bright. Let's go to 120 and 110. Okay. All right. We got it set to soft light. You can go to overlay too, but that adds way too much contrast. Overlay is a lot more powerful than soft light, because we want to build this with a lot of layers so that it blends more. If you only use a couple, it's not going to blend nearly as much. So that's why we're not using the stronger overlay, which that can work in some instances. We're going to go with soft light. It's a little bit lighter version. Okay, another thing that I like to add in my composites to blend them together is a gradient map. So click on your adjustment layers again, go to gradient map. This little gradient here in the properties palette, you can double click on that circle if it's not up. You can click on it and select the gradient that you want. And we're going to go, there's some gold gradients here, but I'm going to click one of the sepia ones because I don't want quite so orange. So that looks like a pretty good one. And this is kind of a trial and error process. You're going to have to see what works. But this kind of has that golden hour feel. It's a little bit dark, you know, a little bit on the tan side, but I think it's going to work for this image. We're going to click OK. We're going to set this to soft light also. And we're going to lower the opacity to 40%. Okay, there we go. So there's without, and there's with. So we're basically just building contrast. And the gradient map, basically what it does is, on the dark side of the gradient, that color is filled in with fills in the shadows, and the light side fills in the highlights, rather than having just a global color. Okay, and we're going to add, I feel like it's a little bit too saturated at this point, so I'm going to add one more black and white layer on top of that, and leave it how it is, but lower the opacity to about 20%. There we go. Okay, now we've got a real sepia type of tone look coming with the image coming through, and that's probably a little bit too much of a sepia. I want a little bit more of the natural color, but we're going to bring that back, and I'm about to show you how. But for now, I think it looks pretty good. So what I'm going to do is put all these adjustment layers in one group. I'm going to click the top one, shift click the bottom one, and then press Command G to put them in a group and label ADJ layers, adjustment layers. So they're all in a group now. So let's turn them off. There's before, there's after. So it's really starting to come together now, starting to blend, starting to look pretty good. And you see also down here the shadows got a lot darker, a lot more contrast. So now we're gonna, at the end here, I'm gonna add some filters to this image to help it blend even more. And when you add filters, a lot of times you can build up some noise, and that you don't want that. Now I'm gonna add grain at the end of the image once I bring it back in the Lightroom, but you don't want the noise that's created from filters a lot of times is a little bit too rough and harsh. So the grain you can make softer. And you can see there's a little bit of noise building up back here in the shadows. It's not terrible, it's not bad, but we're gonna go ahead and kind of get rid of that anyway. And the way that we're gonna do that is we're gonna use a filter called denoise, and then we're gonna resharpen it with a high pass layer. So we're done working non-destructively now. At this point, we can still move him around if we decide we want to put him somewhere else, which is a definite advantage, and it's huge when you're going through an image the first time, because you don't know, you think you know where you're going, but you might, once you get down the road a little bit, you've been working on it for a while, you may decide you want to go back and change something. You can do that now. You can change the mask, you can change the position of him, you can change just about anything, because these are all adjustment layers here. So, and actually, you know what? One more thing I'm going to do. I'm going to open up my adjustment layers. I'm going to go back and add a photo filter here just to kind of finish it off. And I'm just going to use that top one, that warming filter, because without it, I'm going to turn it off. I feel like it's a little bit too much of a sepia tone, so we're going to add that just to warm it up just a little bit, because this is sunset. So, and you can double click. There's different photo filters here, cooling filters, solid colors. We're just going to use the first warming filter right there. Okay. So, like I said, we're done working non-destructively now, and I just press Command 0 to make it full screen, or to bring the image full screen as big as it'll fit. So I'm going to press Shift Command Option E, and that's going to merge everything we've done into one layer on the top. Make sure you're on the top layer. There you go. Okay, now I'm going to duplicate that, and I'm going to turn that top one off. I'm going to go to this one. I'm going to name it Denoise, and I'm going to go up here to Filter, Noise, Reduce Noise, and I'll zoom out here in the little dialog box. Okay, set the strength to 10, everything else 0. Hit OK. That is it's gonna blur everything to get all the noise out. But what we're essentially doing here is we're blurring it. See how it made it real soft? I'm gonna turn it off. There's before, there's after, but it's really taking out all that extra noise. Now I'm going to sharpen it. I'm going to select that second layer, let's name it High Pass, and go to Filter, Other, High Pass. We're going to set it to a relatively low radius of 3. If you go higher, let's go down here, that creates halos. You don't want halos. So let's go to 2, 3. That's usually a pretty good amount. You go higher than that, you're going to start to get a little halo around the edges here. We don't want that. So hit OK. And then set the blending mode of that to overlay. Now I'm going to highlight both these layers by holding Shift and clicking them both. Press Command G to group them. And let's name this Denoise / Sharpen. Okay. Now it made it a little bit softer, but it got a lot of extra noise out. I'm going to turn it off. There's before, and there's after. There's not much of a difference there, but it did blur it a little bit more. That's okay, because we're going to add some detail back in when we add our filters here. Okay, so let's zoom out. And that's just a subtle change, but it can make a difference down the road, trust me. Okay, so now I'm gonna go in and I'm gonna dodge and burn him a little bit just to create a little bit more contrast and in the shadows and highlights, and just Dodging and burning is a step that I used to skip, but now that I've started doing it, it really adds a lot of depth to the image. That's what you want. You want it to have a little bit of a 3D effect. It makes it look more real when you really add that shape by dodging and burning. So what we're going to do here is create a blank layer. Go over here to the layers palette, click the blank layer, or you can press Shift Command N, and go to Edit, Fill. We're going to fill with 50% gray, and we're going to set the blending mode of that to overlay. Okay, now I want this, I'm just going to dodge and burn him. You can do the background too, but as I'm doing him, I don't want to get on the background. So what I'm going to do is go back to my cutout over here. I'm going to shift click on the mask of him to highlight that mask, march it with the marching ants, and I'm going to hit my mask button on my dodge and burn layer to mask that, just so we're going to get him. Name this dodge and burn. Okay. So now I'm going to press O, or go over here. Let's select my dodge tool. I'm going to do the highlights first. I've got my exposure set to 8%, range the midtones. Right key makes the brush bigger, left key makes it smaller. I'm going to stay relatively zoomed out so I can see what's going on, unless I'm doing these little wrinkles in his shirts, then in his pants, then I'll zoom in a little bit. But I want to be able to see, because you can really go overboard on this, and you can really change the look of an image. You can make it better, you can also make it worse, so you have to be really careful. So make sure you're on your gray layer. I've got my dodge tool selected, so I'm going to go over the highlights of him and just paint over them and make them stand out a little bit more. Okay, and I'm probably not going to do the whole thing with you watching, because it's going to take me a few minutes here to do this. So basically, I'm just going over the highlights, painting over them to accentuate them a little bit. And then you're gonna do this, and then you're gonna do the same thing with the burn tool. I do each separately. So I'm gonna go through and do the highlights, and then once I get done, I'm gonna go over here and select the burn tool. And you can also once my burn tool is selected, it could be the same thing for dodge. You can hold the Alt key or Option, and it'll toggle back and forth between the two if you don't want to go over here and select them and do them all at once. So now I've got the burn tool selected, and I'm just going to burn in the shadows here, just like this. Creating, and this is like again, this is just creating depth in the image, and it really gives it that cool look, almost like a 3D feel. And as you're doing it, because the opacity isn't very high, it's going to be kind of hard to see what you're doing. Some instances you can, but we're only set to 8% because you don't want to overdo it. So you're just building up contrast as you go. Okay. Now, I haven't done it a whole lot here, but you can already see it's starting to kind of take shape here. So I'm going to pause the video right now, and then I'm going to come back. I'm going to do all this dodge and burn, and I'm going to come back and finish the image. Okay, so now I've got my dodge and burn layer done here. I'm going to turn it off. There's before, there's after, before, after. Nothing crazy, just adds a little bit more depth to the picture, which makes it look a little more cool and gives it that extra punch that really kind of helps finish it once you're close to the end. So we've got that done. I'm going to highlight my dodge and burn layer over here, my denoise and sharpen, and my adjustment layers, and I'm going to press Command G again and group them and label this adjustments. Okay. Now we are ready to start with the filters. At this point, I think that the image, you could probably say this is done. If you don't want to buy any third-party filters, if you think that they're not worth it, then they do cost a little bit extra. Personally, I love them. I use them all the time. I highly recommend the ones that I'm about to use. But this could be a finished image if you wanted it to. I think that it looks pretty good overall. We're gonna just do a couple filters here just to add a little bit more blending and just give it a little bit more contrast and finish it off. So what we're gonna do, the first one I'm gonna do is Color Effects Pro 4. And that's probably my favorite plugin. I use it on almost every image that I create now, whether it's a composite or just a regular photo. So what we're going to do is press Shift, Option, Command E, and make sure you're on your top group here. That is going to merge everything together on top into one layer. Oop. Try it again. It's not selecting. Highlight your top group. There we go. Okay. For some reason, Photoshop wasn't selected. Okay, now we're on our top layer. You need a layer to start with here, so now I'm going to go into Color Efex Pro. Click on that in my little dialog box here that comes with the filter. The first thing I'm going to add is Pro Contrast, and I usually slide Dynamic Contrast to the right to the end of the word contrast, and then Correct Contrast and Correct Color Cast about halfway down the words. And I don't know why. I mean, I just feel like that's a good starting point, and you don't want to go overboard because it can be way too much. I feel like that's a little bit too saturated with the dynamic contrast, so I just bring it down to about right there. So if you uncheck the box, you can see just adding a little bit more punch, and it's also bringing a little bit of color back. If you'll notice, right in this area in his clothes, there's before and there's after. So you've got the image blended with those hue saturation layers, black and white adjustment layers, and it's kind of adding a global color. But when you use Pro Contrast, it does something to it. I can't really explain, but it brings back some of the natural color. Since the image is blended beforehand, this really helped blend it even more. So we've got that. Now we're going to add a little bit of Glamour Glow, which is going to make this little flare in here a little bit more glowy. So I'm going to click here, Add Filter at the bottom. Go to Glamour Glow right there. I'm going to make the warmth about 30 and the saturation 0. I'm going to move the glow up to about 50. Now it's doing it to the whole image. We don't want that. So it's got these control points over here on the right here. If you hit the plus button, that's going to turn off the filter everywhere except where you put the control point. So click right there, and then this little top button, you can slide it. That shows the area where the glow is going to be applied. So we want it to have a flare effect, so I'm just going to leave it right there. Okay, now I'm going to add another filter, probably my favorite one, it's Detail Extractor. Now when you click on it at first, it's really too kind of washed out. There's not enough contrast, so I'm going to move the contrast to the right to about 50, right there. Now, I love what it's doing to him and the ground and the trees. I don't like it quite so much on the sky. So again, the control point's over here. I'm going to hit the minus control point now. Click on this sky over here where it's making it real dark, and then increase that about right there. And then if you hold Option and click on the control point in the middle, you can create a duplicate, the exact same control point, and move it around. So I'm going to do that, and just over the whole area of the sky pretty much, just to make sure we're not getting too much on the sky. So I don't want that. Okay, now I'm going to turn off Detail Extractor, turn it back on to see where we are here. I'm going to add one more up here, make it real small so it doesn't get on his head. Okay, there's before, there's after. Before, after. Love what it's doing to it. It's really bringing out all those details. And I believe that's probably about all we're going to do with this one. Let's add one more. Let's add a Brilliance Warmth. I'm going to warm it up just a little bit. Let's go to 15. And move this bottom slider up right about 5. So that's warming everything up just a little bit. That sky's a little more orange now. I like that. Adding a little bit of warmth to his skin. Okay, so here's before, and there's after. Really, I mean, this plugin, Nik software is, I mean, it's unbelievable what it can do to an image. And you can probably achieve all this in Photoshop, but it's going to take a lot more time, a lot more effort. And Nik software is not cheap. I think it's about $200 for Color Efex Pro, but I mean, it's worth every penny in my book because, like I said, I use it in almost every image I create. Okay, wait, okay. And it's going to save this back onto a new layer in Photoshop, and this is probably going to take a minute because there's quite a few layers here, or quite a few filters over here, so because we got them stacked on top of each other. So I'm going to pause this until it loads back into Photoshop. So we've got our Color Efex Pro filter applied now, and we created that that's the layer that we merged on top to work off of in Color Effects. We're just going to delete that because we don't need it. Nothing's on it. Okay, so there's before Color Effects and there's after. See it. Zoom in a little bit here. See there. Okay, before again, it's really still got that it's kind of sepia tone to it, but once we did that, it really brought some color back, and I mean, it just helped make it look that much more real. Added a lot of detail, added a little bit of flair here. I mean, it did a great job. Okay, so one more thing. We are going to press Shift Option Command E one more time on the top layer. I'm having problems with that for some reason. Once you select that little Nick software dialog box, then you're not really on it in Photoshop anymore, so you can't use keyboard shortcuts until you select it again. Shift Option Command E. There we go. Okay, I'm going to name this one Topaz. Another filter that I love to use is Topaz Adjust. Topaz Detail is great also, but I like Adjust better, and it adds even more detail, sharpens everything a little bit, and just kind of a finishing touch that I do typically for my sports stuff. I don't use it on regular images usually. I do Nick software, but Topaz is it's got more of a grungy feel, I feel like. So I use that on my sports. It does build up a lot of noise though, and that's one of the reasons I use the denoise filter. Okay, so we've got our blank layer, or not our blank layer. We've got our layer here with everything merged. Go to Filter, Topaz Labs, Topaz Adjust. Topaz Adjust is also pretty affordable. It's only like $50, and you can buy the whole suite. I don't know how much it costs, but I know it's fairly reasonable, and they've got a lot of really good programs. So you've got all your presets over here in the effects panel on the left, and a lot of them are great. And basically what I've done is I've gone, and I don't even remember which one it was, but I used one, and then I just went over here to the global adjustments and went through all these options and just kind of tweaked them a little bit and created a preset that I use for my sports stuff. It's called Athlete Drama 2. Now it's really adding a lot of clarity. It's adding a bunch of detail, and that's way too much. You can click and hold, and that's before and that's after. It's really overdoing it, but that's okay because it's also adding a bunch of noise. And for some reason, there's one complaint I have about Topaz is the preview panel is pretty terrible. You can't see. You can kind of get an idea of what's going on, but you can't see much detail. Part of this is because I'm on the Retina display on my MacBook Pro, and it's not optimized for that. But even on my iMac that's not Retina, it still is kind of hard to tell what's going on. And the preview doesn't really look like what you end up with. It looks a lot worse, to be honest. So I know that this is going to end up being better. And like I said, this is a preset I've created for sports stuff, so it typically works. I don't really know any instance that it hasn't. But it's overdoing it, but I'm going to lower the opacity once we're in Photoshop. So I'm going to go ahead and click OK. And we're going to let this process. It will take just a second. Run through this. And then so we merged all the layers on top in Photoshop again, and then we applied Topaz to them. So if you turn it off, there's before and there's after. And now it really brought even more detail out. Nick did a great job, but it brought more detail out in the trees. But Topaz also adds some noise in the sky here. You can see some on his skin, his clothes, pretty much everywhere. It added some halos in here. I love the detail, but the noise is just too much. So we're going to lower the opacity to about 20%. Maybe, let's go 30 maybe. Is that too much? No, I don't think so. Maybe 25, lower it just a hair. Okay. So there's before. There's after, even more detail. We lowered the opacity pretty low, so there's a little bit of noise, but that's okay. It's not going to be the end of the world. Now, I'm going to mask this because I don't like what it's doing to the sky. The sky's getting a little bit too dramatic now. Hit the mask button, press B for my brush. I'm going to press the right brush. Well, okay. There, right bracket key to make it bigger. I'm going to toggle to my black brush by pressing X. Make sure my opacity is at 100, normal mode. And I'm going to paint Topaz off of the sky because I don't want it on the sky. It's too much. Little too much. Don't want to overdo it. Like I said, I've been trying to go for a realistic look at my composites, and So there's a fine line between looking cool and being too much going overboard. Okay, so now I think we've got that off most of the sky. Just painting a loose mask here, doesn't have to be perfect. Make sure we got it on him all the way. Okay. There's before, there's after, before, after. So it's adding a little bit of clarity, a little bit of contrast, a little bit of sharp end of detail. So now I'm going to hold shift and select both of my Nick layer and my topaz layer, press Command G, name this filters. One more thing I'm going to do, we've got the sun behind him. I'm going to create a blank layer. I've got my brush selected. I'm going to press the right bracket key to make it bigger. I'm going to make sure my hardness up here is set to 0. And then I'm going to hold the Option key, select the sky here. My eyedropper tool selects the sky, or selects whatever, you can select that color, whatever you're moused over. And I'm going to just click one time right here. That might be a little bit too yellow. Oh, and that's too white, so let's go in here. Try that. Okay, there's a flare. I'm going to lower the opacity to, I don't know, 30, 20 maybe. Also, once you're on that layer, if you press your number buttons, then like I just pressed 2-0, then it lowered the opacity to 20. Or you can go over here in the layers palette, go up to opacity and lower it to 20. Before, so that's adding a little bit of sun flare in there. And I believe that's it. I believe we are done. I'm going to close that Nick panel. I'm going to press F to go to full screen, press Command 0. Now we're fitting to the screen. And that looks pretty good. I'm very happy with the way this turned out. I think we're done. We've added, like I said, I'm going to turn all these off. There's our adjustment layers, and that's good if you don't want to use filters, if you don't want to spend the extra money, but I went in and added Nick and Topaz and then added a flare, and that it kind of finishes it off a little bit. That's good. That's better. So there's our finished image. And if you want to learn more about me, you can go to my website, matthernandezphotography.com. All these tutorials will be on my blog. I've also got my YouTube channel on here, all my social media. I'm pretty active on Facebook and Google+. So you can find me on there, follow me. And I appreciate everybody stopping by and watching this video. I hope you learned something. And hopefully there will be more to come down the road. I'll see you again next time.